All right, and thanks to you at home for joining us this hour. Rachel has the night off, and at this hour, we're following the big story of the night. The Wall Street Journal reporting that Special Counsel Robert Mueller has, in the past few weeks, convened a grand jury in Washington, D.C. to investigate Russian interference in the 2016 election and whether there was coordination between the Trump campaign and Russia. The Journal's reporting has now been followed up by the Washington Post. Now, of course, it's important to note that tonight's news does not mean that indictments are imminent, or even for that matter, that they would necessarily happen. But it does mark the next formal step in Special Counsel Mueller's investigation. Typically, when federal prosecutors convene a grand jury, they do so in order to show that grand jury evidence. A grand jury can also subpoena documents and force witnesses to testify. In the end, a federal prosecutor needs a grand jury to sign off on any indictment if, and of course that's a big if, criminal charges are going to be brought. And in that sense, today's news is the latest step in a long process that started just over a year ago when the FBI launched an investigation into the Trump campaign's contacts with Russia. While it was widely suspected that the FBI was investigating those ties, the existence of the investigation only became official in March, when FBI Director James Comey sent shockwaves across the country by confirming during a live hearing on Capitol Hill and broadcast all around the globe what everyone had until then only suspected: that the Trump campaign was the subject of an open, active counterintelligence investigation by the FBI and had been since the summer before the election.
I have been authorized by the Department of Justice to confirm that the FBI, as part of our counterintelligence mission, is investigating the Russian government's efforts to interfere in the 2016 presidential election. And that includes investigating the nature of any links between individuals associated with the Trump campaign and the Russian government, and whether there was any coordination between the campaign and Russia's efforts. As with any counterintelligence investigation, this will also include an assessment of whether any crimes were committed.
Now, that was James Comey testifying in March, revealing that the investigation had begun months before, in July of 2016. Comey was due to testify again on May 11th in open session, but 2 days before that hearing, the bombshell news landed late on the night of May 9th that Donald Trump had fired James Comey from his job as FBI director. 2 days later, in his first public comments, the president sat down for an interview with NBC News' Lester Holt that turned out to be very consequential, since during that interview, he spoke very candidly about why he fired Comey, because he was thinking about Russia.
There was no good time to do it. And in fact, when I decided to just do it, I said to myself, I said, you know, this Russia thing with Trump and Russia is a made-up story.
So that was the reason Donald Trump gave, voluntarily, on TV. Later that night and over the next few days, James Comey's side of the story was revealed in the pages of the New York Times. At first, a private dinner at the White House back in January, the president had asked Comey to pledge his loyalty to him. And then, during a meeting in the Oval Office, and after dismissing everyone else from the room, including the Attorney General, Trump had pressured Comey to drop the investigation into fired National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, reportedly saying, "I hope you can let this go." So we had these two stories, the president saying he fired Comey over Russia and what he called the made-up Russia story, and the former FBI director saying the president had pushed him to back off the investigation into Michael Flynn. Those competing stories prompted a crucial development in this story. The day after the report about the Oval Office meeting, things began moving at the Justice Department. Attorney General Jeff Sessions had recused himself from the investigation months before because he had been part of the Trump campaign. That left Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein in charge. And after the president said he was thinking of Russia when he fired Comey, and after Comey's side of the story got out, Deputy AG Rosenstein made the consequential decision to appoint a special counsel. And not just any special counsel, but Comey's predecessor at the FBI. Robert Mueller was taking over the investigation. Since then, Special Counsel Mueller has been methodically going about business, hiring a team of experienced lawyers, 16 and counting, with extensive knowledge of federal corruption, money laundering, and criminal fraud cases. Occasionally, details of the special counsel's work have spilled out into the open. In June, we learned that the special counsel had essentially swallowed up ongoing federal investigations into the activities of Trump campaign chair Paul Manafort and of Michael Flynn. NBC News and other outlets reported that subpoenas were issued to business associates of both Manafort and Flynn by a federal grand jury in the Eastern District of Virginia, which made sense. The Eastern District of Virginia sits right outside Washington, D.C. It handles lots of national security cases and prosecutions with an intelligence component to them. Indeed, for months, while grand jury details have been scarce, it seemed that the federal investigation was being run out of the Eastern District of Virginia. That is, until tonight, when the Wall Street Journal and now the Washington Post reported that the special counsel has, for several weeks, been using a separate grand jury in Washington, D.C. And here's an interesting idea. The Washington Post reporting, quote, experts said that Washington would be the appropriate place to convene a grand jury to examine actions taken by Trump since he became president and took up residence at the White House. Many of the potential crimes Mueller's team is investigating would have occurred in the district, such as allegations that Trump aides or advisors made false statements in disclosure records or lied to federal agents. Tonight, lawyers for the president have been united in their response. 3 members of his outside legal team have responded to the news with versions of the same statement, saying, quote, we have no reason to believe President Trump is under investigation. And joining us now is one of the reporters who broke this story, Del Quinton Weber, and he covers the Justice Department and federal law enforcement for the Wall Street Journal. Del, first of all, congratulations on your scoop, and thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for having me.
So let's just go through a few of the things that you brought out in this piece. The first one is the idea that the fact of this separate grand jury in D.C. means that Mueller's team is dug in for the long haul. If you could explain.
Yeah, you know, they had already been, as you said, using a grand jury out of the Eastern District of Virginia that was investigating, at least that we're able to determine, Michael Flynn. And by switching to one in D.C., what you're essentially saying is, hey, if we were just going to keep investigating only Flynn and Flynn aspects of this case, we would just keep using the same grand jury. We wouldn't want to reinvent the wheel. By switching and starting his own grand jury in Washington, D.C., just a stone's throw from his own office, what he's saying is this is going to be a broader probe. This is very serious, you know, and I'm expected to keep doing this for a while.
And you've also talked about some of the people that he's brought in as evidence that this is a very serious probe that could be long-term. One of them is Greg Andres, a top partner at a big New York law firm. Explain why he's important.
Well, if you're a top partner in a major New York law firm and you're making good money, you're not going to leave your good, solid job at a major law firm to join an investigation that's not going to last very long or is not very serious. You're going to leave it for something that you think will end somewhere or someplace that's going to be, you know, a big challenge that's going to take a long time and a lot of time. And so that's why, you know, you wouldn't just leave a big law firm willy-nilly, as one of the former federal prosecutors I interviewed said.
Yeah, and, you know, it's always hard to figure out what the motivations are of people to leak. This is, you know, very sensitive information, obviously, and while, of course, you aren't going to characterize who your sources are, do you get a sense of why information like this is coming out at this time?
No, I think that people, in general, if you just keep digging, you're eventually going to get some information. There's been a lot of great reporting on a lot of sensitive subjects lately about stuff in Washington. But as you know, grand juries are secret for like the prosecutors and the agents who work there, but they're not secret. If you're a witness and you go before a grand jury, you can tell the world what you said in there. Or if you get a subpoena, you can tell the world what you said in there. And so the issue, when you know that they're moving to a grand jury probe, it's no longer a counterintelligence investigation, which is highly classified, very secretive. Grand jury stuff is still very secretive, but it's open to the public. You know, you have a bunch of grand jurors in that room. You vetted them, but not, you know, super extensively, and you have to report back to them periodically on what you found, especially if you want to seek charges at some time. And as we know now, there's no, you know, they're still sussing it out. This is very early in the process. He's only been doing this for 2 months.
Right. And we also know that, and we're going to talk a little bit later with one of the senators doing it, that there are now some attempts to protect this investigation from Donald Trump, who I'm sure is not pleased with these new developments. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, you know, there have been some measures put forth in Congress to try to insulate Robert Mueller so he can't be fired, because some members of both parties are concerned that, you know, President Trump has kind of, you know, he wasn't happy with Jeff Sessions last week, and, you know, he's indicated he doesn't like this Russia investigation. And they're a little concerned that he might take steps to try to curtail it or end it, perhaps a la the Saturday Night Massacre in 1973, during the Watergate investigation.
Yep.
You know, but people have to keep in mind when these things are being investigated like this, no one knows how they're going to turn out. And people who prognosticate, you know, a potential endings to these things are often wrong.
Yeah.
And a lot of stuff never turns into indictments or charges. And so we need to be very measured and thoughtful as we do it. It's a significant move. It shows that, you know, having your own grand jury in Washington highlights that, hey, this is broader than what I thought it was before.
Sure.
And they're going to be issuing subpoenas and perhaps taking testimony.
Yep. Well, Del Wilber, reporter for the Wall Street Journal, thank you for your time tonight. Great scoop.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you. Now
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.